Now we are able to send our request from this form to our backend, but from user point of view, it's not visible if anything is done about it. So just like here, let's fill the form with a user. And let's slow the network. Now sending the request. Here the request is in progress. It takes 2 seconds to complete, but on UI we have no feedback to user about it. In fact, this button, this layout is allowing us to click this button multiple times, and that means we can send same request a couple of times if we would like to. So let's fix that part. Let's start with this case. Let's disable the button while the API call is in progress. So we would be eliminating multiple clicks. So starting with that one, changing the network speed back to no throttling. And let's add our new test. I'm also changing the size of this window so that both the test console and the browser is visible. Now we are going to send a request once again in this test. So just copying this previous test, this last one, where we are sending request by filling the form and clicking the button. Just copying the test and pasting after that one. Now in this test, it disables the button when there is an ongoing API call. Again, we are going to render sign up page. We will be filling the form. We will be clicking the button, but for checking the disable, we will click this button multiple times. So let's add another one right after this one. And let's check how many requests is received to our server right here. So let's have a variable here. Let's say this is a counter and initially it is 0. And whenever it receives a request, it increases this number. So in each request, this number, this counter is going to be increasing one by one. So if the button is not disabled, here we are clicking the button twice, so the counter will be 2 in the end, but we are expecting the button to be disabled so that this counter will be 1 in this test case. So we expect this counter to be 1. So that's the test. Again, we have this REST endpoint. We are filling the form, clicking the button twice, but we expect this counter to be 1 because as soon as we click this button for the first time, that button will be disabled so that the next click will not trigger another API call to this server so that the counter will not increase. So saving this one. So the test is failing because currently we don't have any implementation about disabling the button, and here it is showing we are expecting the counter to be 1, but it is 2. So let's fix that. Here in the submit we are making the API call, and we are using this variable, this disabled, to disable the button right here. So before making the post request right here, we can set this disabled to true. So when we click the button, since this disabled will be true, if we try to click that button next time, since the button will be disabled, this submit function we have here won't be called. So let's save this one. Now the test is passing and we can test the same thing here on browser 2, again making the network slow so that we can see the result, and filling the form. And as soon as the passwords are matching, we are enabling the button. Now sending the request, and here we can see the button is disabled, and no matter how many times I click, since the button is disabled, we only have one request going to backend. Again, changing it back to no throttling. So this is working as we expected. Now let's refactor our tests. We are repeating the steps for querying these inputs and filling them. So in both of these tests, we do the same thing. So let's create a function right here in this describe. Let's call this one as setup. And since we will be doing this asynchronous actions, this setup will be async. So what we will do is we will render the page, we will query the inputs, we will fill the inputs. So just cutting this part and pasting here. And in this test, this is not the last test. Here's the last test, the previous one. Since we just cut that part, here we can call setup, but since setup is asynchronous, let's also add a wait for it. And let's repeat the same thing for this last test, just deleting the repeating part and replacing it with the setup function. We can also do the same thing in this first test for the interactions. Here we are rendering the sign up, but in this one we are just updating the password and password repeat inputs. In this setup we also fill the username and email inputs too, but since it's not affecting this password test, we can safely call this setup where the passwords are matching, so that we can query the button and check if it is enabled or not. So let's save this one to see the refactoring is not breaking anything. So the tests are still passing. Now we disable the button during the API call. Other than just making the button disabled, it is better to display an indicator like Spinner to provide a feedback to user about there is an ongoing progress with that button click. And for that one, let's display Bootstrap Spinner. Here in the Bootstrap page, we have this Spinner component, and here in the usage for the buttons, we have these two examples, and here we can see the button is having this spinner part, which is this one, and we have this loading text. So we can use this part in our component too to show the indicator. So let's have a test about it. Just copying and pasting the previous test once again. So in this one, it displays Spinner while the API request in progress. Now we don't need to have a counter. In this one, we will not be checking what is the behavior on the server side. We are focused to the client only. So we are rendering our component, filling the forms, and here we are querying the button, and we are clicking the button. Now at this step, just removing the remaining part of the test. Now we are going to query this element, this element. We are going to use this one in our code, so that we are going to query this one, and we will check if it is there or not. So far we have been using this getByRole for querying the elements based on their role, and for this case this span has a role attribute and we can use this one. So let's go with that. We are expecting to get the spinner by querying getByRole, and the role name is right here. It is status. So we expect this spinner to be in the document. Let's show the test console too, and here saving this one. The test is failing because in this test here the role status is not able to be accessible element, and here it shows which roles are currently accessible on this page, and we have this heading, text boxes, and the button. So let's fix this one. Let's just copy this span and paste it right here before this sign up text. Saving this, and here scrolling on this page, here we can see the spinner is visible on the page because currently it is not shown conditionally. It is there, but the test is failing. Again, it is not able to find this role on this page, and that is because of this part, area hidden is equal to true. So this element is blocked from the accessibility point of view. So for this element we can just remove this part, and let's save this. On UI nothing is changed, but now in test result here the test is passing because now this role is accessible, and this query, this getByRole status, is returning this element, and this element is in the document. Alternatively, we can access to specific elements with our custom IDs. So for this one, instead of having a role like this, we can have a test ID for ourselves, like this one. The test ID is defined like this for an element, data-test ID, and let's say this ID is spinner. And in test, instead of querying the element with the getByRole, we can get it by getByTest ID, and the test ID is spinner. Saving this. The tests are still passing. So both are fine. Normally the test ID is not the best way to go with, but in the elements like this one, if we don't have anything to query about it, then we can use the test ID for that element, which means we would be adding test related data to our production code. That's not always a good thing. We can go with the test ID or we can go with the role. So undoing this one, I'm going to go with the role. So this span will have the role of status, and also undoing the test and again querying the spinner based on the status role. Now all tests are passing, but obviously this behavior on the client, this spinner visibility on the initial page, is not a good user experience. So this spinner must not be visible initially. So adding another test, just copying the previous one. And in this one, it does not display spinner when there is no API request. In this one, we don't need a server to be running, so we are just running the setup. We are not going to click the button too, so we will be just rendering the page and we will check if there is this spinner on the page. So we are querying the spinner and we expect the spinner not to be in the document. So saving this one. So this is failing because we are receiving that element, that spinner is on that page. So let's fix this. Now we are going to display this spinner part conditionally, and to track the API progress, let's have a variable here. Let's say we will have a variable of API progress, and this will be initially false. And here in this submit function, as soon as we click the button, we will set this API progress to true. So this variable will be updated, and if this API progress is true, then let's display this span, and we can do it like this in Svelte, just adding a space right here. So this part will be visible conditionally, and this is how we do in Svelte in curly braces and with hash sign. Here the Svelte extension is showing us the options. There is this if, and here it is opening and closing an if block right here, and here we will use the condition, and that condition is the API progress. So if the API progress is true, then this part, this if block will be visible on the page. So just cutting and pasting this one. So if there is API progress, if the API progress value is true, then this span will be rendered. Otherwise, this won't be visible. So let's save this one. And here on browser, we can see the spinner is gone. But on test console, here we are seeing the test is failing. And that's failing because it is saying that it is unable to find an accessible element with this role status. And that's leading this test to fail. But that's what we are expecting actually. There won't be an element having the role of status. But the problem is we are using this getByRole function, and the behavior of this getBy query is they are throwing exception if they don't find any element. In testing library page, there is this table showing how the queries are working. So there are query types of getBy, findBy, queryBy, and there getAll, findAll, queryAll versions. And here it is saying if getBy have no match result, it is throwing error, and if finds a match, it returns that matching element, and if there is multiple matches for that query, it is throwing error, and it doesn't support await. And for the findBy, that's also throwing error for not match cases. But we have this one, queryBy, which is returning null if it is not matching an element. And for this case, we are going to replace this getByRole with queryByRole. Here we have the list of the queries by label text, by placeholder text, by text, and the others. So we will be replacing get by role with the query by role. So let's fix our test. Instead of get by role, we will use query by role, and this is going to be returning null if there is no element with the status, and so that it's not going to be in the document. So let's save this one, and here the test is passing. For the implementation of this part, for this conditional block, instead of this if, Svelte offers another conditional block. We have seen that in this autocomplete previously. We have this await, and we can also use that one, and we can do it like this. Instead of having a boolean value like this one, we can use this variable for the reference of this Axios post promise. This is a promise here. It is a promise. It is returning a promise back to us, and we can assign this promise to our local variable of this API progress. So initially, let's say it's going to be undefined, and as soon as we click the button, this is going to be a promise, and this is going to be doing that API call. And here in this part, instead of this if, we can use await, and we can close this await block like this one. So let's save this, and this is also working. Let's also show how it is working on browser. Opening the console, slowing the network, filling the form. Now we are sending our request. So we expect this button to be disabled, but also we expect there is this spinner visible right here. And let's see it. Here the request is completed, and the spinner is hidden after the request is completed. We have things to do on this button, but for now it's working for the current requirements. So the button is disabled, and at the same time the progress indicator, the spinner, is visible during the API call.